Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Civil War Roundtable, The History of the Union League with Jim Mundy. Founding Forward is the nonprofit organization that provides civic education to students and teachers from across the country, cares for the history of the Union League of Philadelphia, and fosters an engaged citizenry across the United States. As you will hear tonight, the League was founded to save the Union and defend the Constitution. Today, Founding Forward continues to save the Union and defend the Constitution. That work is in teaching the rising generation to appreciate our American political tradition and give them the skills they need to uphold our form of self-government. This work is made possible entirely by the generosity of Union League members and others who choose to support our work. If you have already made a gift, we are approaching our year end, June 30th. If you've already made a gift this year, that's wonderful, and I thank you. If you have not, we're more than happy to correct that. You could see myself or one of our colleagues in the back of the room at the end of the night. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. First, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. We will do Q&A at the end of the program with microphones. One of the Founding Forward staff will be wandering around. Please raise your hand if you do have a question and we will find you. Please make sure to wait for the microphone as we are live streaming the program and we want to make sure we capture all of your good questions. A reminder, questions should be 2 to 3 sentences and you should be able to put a question mark at the end of the sentence. I'll remind you tonight that at the end of the evening, we will have a QR code on the screen for a survey. If you have any comments, ways that we can improve, future suggestions, please complete that survey. We do have a few great upcoming programs. We are going to take these programs on the road during the academic year. We are mostly here at the League House, but over the summer, we will be traveling to other Union League and Founding Forward properties. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce Founding Forward board member and dedicated volunteer, Sue Heindel.
Thank you, Kira, and good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our program. In the 163-year history of the Union League of Philadelphia, there are many historic figures. Great patriotic men and women who helped save the Union and were civic and business leaders. Along the way, these great patriots built the greatest city club, no, the greatest club in the world. Amen. Our speaker tonight, Jim Mundy, was witness to nearly 1/3 of that history. Sorry, Jim, they wrote it that way. No. This is your friend. Don't worry, there's more. There's a little more, Jim. Well, couple more factoids. Jim began at the League in 1978 as an associate archivist, and for the next 45 years, Jim held a wide variety of positions, including librarian, curator, activities manager, membership director, house manager, and director of historical collections, and as a member of the Founding Forward staff historian. As a maker of history here at the League, and as one who chronicles and shares that history, Jim is perhaps one of the most enduring figures of the League over the past 5 decades. He is both a maker of history and a historian. Jim retired, I use that term very loosely. Take that smile off your face, Jim. No, just kidding. From the League in December of 2023 and currently holds the title of Historian Emeritus. He is joined by the President of Founding Forward, John Miko. It is my privilege and honor to welcome Jim Mundy and John Miko.
Thank you, Sue. And thank you, Jim, for coming back and being with us tonight. It's an honor to be to share the stage with you and talk about Union League history. I'm not sure. I was going to ask you what you're up to, but yesterday, as I'm sending that email to Sue, and I do take blame for that, I put the word retired, and almost immediately I got an email, and the email was to all League members, and it was Jim Mundy taking League members to Portugal. Right, Jim? Right? So you're not retired. Is that correct?
I was until yesterday.
Yeah, okay, yes. So do you have any spots left in that program?
6.
6 spots. So if you want to go to Portugal with Jim Mundy,
It's a great
really,
trip.
see Jim afterwards. You're still doing good work for the Union League. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So Jim also was earlier today with our docents, and our docents are a group of wonderful League members and others who share the history mostly through tours that they offer to League members and others in the community. And I want to take an opportunity, and Jim gave them what was your topic tonight, Jim?
Read history.
Read history. So it was a directive, not a topic.
Oh, yeah, no, it was in order.
It was, okay.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it League and Reconstruction, correct?
Yeah. Among other things, yes.
Okay. So I want to take a moment and thank the docents, and I want to ask them to acknowledge them. I want them to all stand up. And everyone, please thank our Union League docents who work so hard. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. So these are Jim's PhD students in Union League history. And Jim had this tough time transitioning, I think. He sent me the PowerPoint. There's 50 slides. 50 slides. Yeah. We're going to go through all of them, but we're going to do it on time because Jim has his bottle of Ardbeg ready to go. Seriously? Yes, at the end of this program. Oh, but it's only available until 7:35. So, Jim, let's start this program. Let's talk about the Union League and the Civil War.
All right, John, thanks very much. I'm a little rusty. I haven't done since November 21st of 2023, so I'm a little rusty. So obviously I'm overcompensating for a few things, including my PowerPoint, so forgive me for that. Right. For me, history is about context. You have to know what came before it to know how it affects it. And so a lot of what I'm doing tonight is going to be about context, and a lot of it will do with Philadelphia before the Civil War, because why was there a need for a Union League once the Civil War begins? And the more you know about Philadelphia history, the light bulb will go off pretty quickly, I think. So I think that's the main reason I overdid the PowerPoint slides, but we'll get through them pretty quickly, though. But to the point about the docents and asking them to read history, just a little story. This has got to be 30 years ago. There was a young member who came up to me and said, we were talking about the Civil War and things like that, and he said, you know, Jim, is it true that because North Carolina was North Carolina, it was on the side of the North? And, you know, after I picked my jaw up off the floor, and and he was sincere. I mean, he really didn't know. And so, to all of you, you know, learn your history. It's really important. So I wanted to make so. Does everybody know what side North Carolina was on, though? I mean, just checking, as they say. So, anyway. So, and I don't mean to embarrass you. I mean, I can't remember his name, but I'll never. It's one of it just keeps hammering home to me the fact that we really need to know our history, and there's such good history here that I hope we all get to know it better. So let's give this a shot and see what happens. Okay, and. All right. I probably didn't turn it on, or does this turn on? Oh, shucks. Can we go back? Oh, what the heck is going on here? Oh, this is fine. All right. History is... I knew they'd pull something on me tonight. I didn't think it would be this, though, so okay. All right, let's go forward and see what happens. All right. So there's history and then there's history. Part of history is mythology. We have these preconceived ideas about history and what was history whenever it was itself. And because of Philadelphia's involvement with Quakerism, I think a lot of people think that Philadelphia was this abolitionist city and that...
I'll be your clicker, Jim.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so here we go. So This is a map of Philadelphia circa 1800. This is the original, oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
All right, I was just having fun there. Sorry.
Okay. If we don't finish in time, it's not my fault at this point, just so you all know, okay? Just want to put that out there. Anyway, and this is important, though, because William Penn meant well, but it didn't turn out the way he wanted. So this is the original city itself, the 2 square miles, Schuylkill on the left, Delaware on the right, Vine Street in the north, and South Street in the south. So that's that. Everything else is Philadelphia County, 130 square miles. As Philadelphia evolved politically, the city as we knew it was basically a Hamiltonian city, right? You all know Mr. Hamilton himself. You've all seen the play. And so you know that he had something called the American Plan, centralized government, centralized banking, government-sponsored physical improvements, canals, railroads, and things like that. And of course, the other side of the coin was the Jeffersonians, the Democratic Republicans, who were more of a rural and agrarian-based party, and so they thought that the yeoman farmer was the future of the country, not the factory worker. So Philadelphia, before it's basically off the ground, already has this conflict within it, politically, socially, economically, the whole 9 yards. So that's that. So I just wanted to get that out there. And then everybody thinks, again, that Philadelphia was this wonderful abolitionist world where slavery didn't exist. In fact, slavery existed in many, many ways in Philadelphia from the very, very beginning. And, oh, gee, here we go again. Just go back, real fastly, please. So anyway, so all those red dots are actually slave owners in Philadelphia between 1789 and 1791 alone, okay? So yes, slavery was here. And of course, without slavery, there was no Civil War. At one point, Philadelphia was home to the country's largest slave owner. His name was Pierce Butler. And who would have thought that Philadelphia would become that at one point in time? Butler was Anglo-Irish, son of a baronet in Ireland, British Army, Battle of Boston Massacre, 1770. 1771, he marries Mary Polly Middleton, the daughter of Colonel Thomas Middleton, whose father and grandfather created this dynasty of plantations and slavery in South Carolina. And so he and his wife would marry. When she dies, actually he inherits all those because she could not. And so Butler himself, when he jumped ship from the British Army to the South Carolina militia in 1775, he sells his commission and buys his own plantation and owns eventually 700 slaves. So slavery is ingrained in Philadelphia all the way around. And here we have, anybody been to St. Simon's Island or Jekyll Island? Okay, there's Butler Island right there, okay? So that's where he had his plantations, rice and cotton, all right? And here we have, the most famous thing he did is he was South Carolina's only representative to the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and he personally inserted and then supported and maintained what is known as the Fugitive Slave Clause. So I'll read it real fast. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof escaping into another shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered upon on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Basically, slaves were property. Therefore, they get returned to their owner. And that was that. Okay? This was Butler. Butler moved to Philadelphia. He had a summer home at the turn of the 19th century, if that doesn't seem incongruous. We all think it is. This was his house. It was at 8th and Chestnut. It took up the entire block. And his grandson would inherit his plantations. We'll talk about that a little later on. But the Butler family is buried at Christ Church. And during the Civil War, Christ Church almost split down the middle and dissolved itself because of the differences in Philadelphia. So here we have Abolition Society, 1775. The Abolition Society still exists. This is 1838. This is the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. And this gentleman here, J. Miller McKim, would become a founding member of the Union League, the city's most famous abolitionist. And he accompanied John Brown's wife to Charleston, West Virginia for his hanging. He then accompanied her back to New York with his body. So, and this is Lucretia Mott, whose portrait, of course, we have down the hall. And so this Abolition Society is indicative, though, but you can see that there were League members, future League members, who were very much involved with abolitionism. They built this hall, Pennsylvania Hall, on North 6th Street. If you know where WHYY is right now, it's the same location. It had only been open for, I think 1 day. They had a program scheduled, but instead Philadelphia mobs burned it to the ground. It didn't last very long. So if you ever think again that Philadelphia is a city of brotherly love, now you know better, okay? All right, and it wasn't just anti-black. There were Irish riots in 1844, pre-famine. The Archbishop of Philadelphia suggested that Catholic school children in public schools read the Catholic Bible, not the Protestant Bible, and that set off this incredible series of riots in Philadelphia. So there's also anti-Catholicism going on in the city at the time. And then to show you that it's not just demographic groups, but also families, the Ingersoll family, one of the great old families of Philadelphia, was split as well. Joseph Reed was a founding member of the Union League, part of the Union Club. He was a Whig member of the House of Representatives from 1841 to 1849. His brother, Charles Jared, was a Democrat, and his children would become some of the most vociferous anti-union, pro-Southern, pro-slavery children in Philadelphia during the Civil War itself, and we'll see some more of them later on. Okay? All right. 1841, the visiting English Quaker Joseph Sturge wrote of Philadelphia, quote, "There is probably no city in the known world where dislike amounting to hatred of the colored population prevails more than the city of brotherly love." Surprise, surprise. In 1848, the slave-turned-abolitionist Frederick Douglass wrote that Philadelphia was, quote, "more than any city in our land holds the destiny of the people." That meant blacks. I don't know why Douglass would have a completely different view of Philadelphia than a Quaker visitor would in 1841, but it goes to show you that Philadelphia presented many different faces to many different people. So 1854, pardon me. Philadelphia is now going to become consolidated. The city and the county become one and the same thing. And this is what it looked like. So here we have a quote from 1854. "Color phobia is more rampant here, Philadelphia, than in this pro-slavery, Negro-hating city of New York." William Wells Brown, African-American abolitionist. He was only an octoroon. Anybody know what an octoroon is? Okay. 1/8 of his background was black. And because of that, he was considered black, not white. So once again, Philadelphia steps forward to become what is becoming known as the most anti-black city in the country. 1856 presidential election, all right, important, right? Because again, slavery is the issue. It's boiling, the pot's going to boil over eventually. So here's the election itself. James Buchanan, the Democrat, nationally got 45% of the vote. In Pennsylvania, he got 50% of the vote, but in Philadelphia, he got 56% of the vote. The Democrats were the party of the South. They were pro-slavery, and that's all you need to know. Millard Fillmore ran on the American nativist ticket. All right, and you can imagine what American nativism is. It's basically they were anti-black, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, anti-immigrant. Get the picture? Okay. In the U.S., they won 22% of the vote. In Pennsylvania, 18% of the vote, but in Philadelphia, 34% of the vote. John Fremont, running as the first Republican candidate for president nationally, got 33%. Pennsylvania, 32%. Philadelphia, 11%, which means 89% of Philadelphia voted, right, against abolitionism. They were against immigration. They were against Jews and Catholics and things like that. 89%, okay? And that's in 1856. So again, I think William Penn is probably turning over in his grave at this point. So, and this is called a campaign handkerchief, and it says basically, Native Americans, beware of foreign influence. Some things don't change, do they? No, they don't. Interesting, isn't it? So in 1859, the country, up until 2 years ago, this was thought to be the country's largest slave auction. And it was the grandson of Pierce Butler who owned the slaves at this point in time. Pierce Butler, the grandson, was an alcoholic, he was a gambler, and to settle his debts, trustees were assigned, and they had a slave auction in Savannah, Georgia. 436 men, women, and children, but mostly families were sold. And up until 2 years ago, that was the largest slave auction in American history. And again, it wasn't a Southerner who sold those slaves, it was a Philadelphian, okay? And this is an advertisement from the Great Weeping, as it was called. 1860 election, Philadelphia does an about turn. 52% of Philadelphia votes for Abraham Lincoln in a four-person race. Amazing, isn't it? What happened? We're still trying to figure that one out. But obviously, But obviously, though, think of those 4 years, though, between 1856 and 1860. Obviously, things were beginning to change, and especially in Philadelphia. But as soon as Abraham Lincoln is elected in November of 1860, in less than a month later, December the 10th, South Carolina becomes the first of 11 states to secede from the Union. And that's the domino effect that will take place until the spring of 1861. And the war itself began with the bombardment of Fort Sumter. You saw that on April the 12th. In Philadelphia, this is a newspaper called the Palmetto Flag. It was dated Saturday, April the 13th, 1861, just one day after a bombardment of Fort Sumter. But why is there a pro-Confederate, pro-slavery newspaper in Philadelphia called the Palmetto Flag? Right? Because Philadelphians bought it. They read it. They believed in what they were saying in this newspaper itself. Absolutely amazing. And just to repeat something, so the Sunday Dispatch of April 14th, 2 days after the Civil War begins, in 1861, noted that in a single block of Walnut Street, 22 Southern families occupied palatial residences. This was a Southern city. If you haven't figured that one out yet, it was a Southern city. I still think of Philadelphia as an English Quaker Southern city to this day in many, many ways. So, all right. So, there had to be some pro-union, anti-slavery folks left in Philadelphia, right, after all this, and there happened to be two specifically, George Henry Boker on the left and John Innes Clark Hare on the right. And Boker would become the heart and soul of the League. These are considered the two founders of the Union League of Philadelphia. They met on South 7th Street in early November of 1862. They thought, and 1862 started as a good year for the Union, but then ended as a pretty bad year for the Union. Things were getting bad in Philadelphia. I mean, clearly they were in the minority, and so they decided it was time to do something about it. And they were going to create this patriotic social society that would eventually become the Union League of Philadelphia. And they are the two. So Boker is a really interesting character, came from an old Huguenot family. He was a Princeton grad because old Philadelphia sent their sons to Princeton, not to Penn, just so you know. And Boker studied law but didn't want to be a lawyer. He became a poet, sonneteer, and playwright eventually. He joined, when he came back to Philadelphia, he joined the Philadelphia Club in 1847. The Philadelphia Club represented old hereditary Philadelphia. It was predominantly pro-Southern and pro-slavery. And here we have Boker sitting at the table as a member of the board of directors. He joined in 1847 as a young man of only 24 because that's what proper Philadelphia did. All right? He would later be elected to the board in 1862, but would refuse to sit. And he was replaced by a fellow named James Smith, who would eventually become a founding member of the Union League. So there was some cracks in the wall of the Philadelphia Club, which were good to see. So let me read this, because this is how Boker presents Philadelphia at the time. At no period in the struggle was the patriotic spirit so low, or the spirit of the traitor so insultingly hopeful. Our secret foes had emerged from their seclusion, taking their wonted social places, and boasting to their foreign visitors that, in what was called unmixed society, they ordered matters, and that all gentlemen would soon be of their way of thinking. Club life reached a state of disruption. Other social assemblies were nothing more than, quote, a nice meeting of traitors led by the jackal Charles Ingersoll. So you can see that Philadelphia is splitting at the top as well as at the bottom. And so it was agreed that they would gather their friends together. They had their first meeting on November the 15th at the home of Benjamin Gerhardt at 226 South 4th Street. The house is still there. So go visit it sometime. And then this is the home of George Boker at 1720 Walnut Street. The second meeting was there on November 22nd, and it was here that the small group of men who started with maybe 12 or 15 men at the home of Gerhardt, now they're up to 30, and they decide to create these articles of association, and they create a name, the Union Club of Philadelphia. And that was done at Boker's home on November 22nd of 1862. And then that gets us to December 27th of 1862 in the home of Dr. John Forsyth Meggs at 1208 Walnut Street. The property is there, but not the house itself. And it was at the meeting and so actually, there was so much support for the Union Club that they had to limit membership to 55 members. So obviously, it's the right idea at the right time. They're picking up momentum. Things are looking good. They meet at the home of Dr. John Forsyth Meggs at this point, and that night, they read the Article of Association, And that would cause a little bit of consternation because, and this is that we actually have the original handwritten Articles of Association from that night. All right? They survived the fire of September of 1866. But you'll notice that there is a blank spot right there, and I'll explain that. So in that spot were two words, Republican Party. And when those words were read, the next gentleman we'll see on the screen, Daniel Doherty, sprang out of his chair and said, "Not for me, not for me. I'm not for any Republican president. I'm for my country." And with that, they had a hard time calming the audience, so to speak. But John Hare, actually Doherty's point was that, now Doherty, obviously, he does not fit the perception of a founder of the Union League, right? Because with a name like Doherty, he's Irish. He happened to be Irish Catholic. He happened to be a Democrat. He was an orator and a lawyer all at the same time. So he had a couple strikes against him, compared to everybody else, if you will. But anyway, so Doherty's thinking, and then supported by John Hare, the judge, said, yes, if we're just going to be a political club, we are doomed to fail. We need patriots, not politicians. So that's December 27th. And here we are on January the 8th of 1863. The Democratic response was to create their own private club called the Central Democratic Committee. And this is in their bylaws, that in the state of Pennsylvania, all power is inherent in the white people, capitalized. And that our government is founded on their authority, and that they have at all times the unalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, and abolish their government in such manner as they think proper. That's basically anarchy. But it means they can do what they want to do. They don't have to follow any form of government, any pre-established rules of government. They can govern the world the way they want to govern it. So you can see what the Union League was facing less than a week after it was organized itself. So this, again, not the city of brotherly love. So this was the very first clubhouse, 1118 Chestnut Street, the house of Hartman Kuhn, who also became a member of the Union League itself. It's long gone, though the address is still there. Now, 6 months after the League was organized, the Philadelphia Evening Journal, and then back in the 19th century, newspapers were published by political parties, and they were very biased in their reporting. So the Journal was a Democratic newspaper, and it's 6 months to the day. This is June the 27th of 1863. It had a front page article, and it says, you can see it says, "The League at Last." And a brief description about the League. They call it an abolition league. And then it published the name, address, and occupation of every league member. Okay? So clearly they did it on purpose because they want other Philadelphians to know who the enemy is now, because the League is now the enemy. And so let me just read a little bit from this, and I'll be able to be fast. So this is from that article itself. It said, "We say, after all these black doings, who can doubt that it is an abolition league, dyed in the wool? They may as well change their name at once and no longer deceive the people with their mock patriotism. Furthermore, the amount of money represented by this body is enormous. The amount of active patriotism is very small." So you can see that already, I mean, within 6 months, the League is attracting a lot of attention. But it's good attention at the same time. So again, and it was also suggested that if you meet one of the League members in the street, trip him, push him, throw a brick through his window, do all those things you do to people you don't like or don't agree with. So, and then during the war, so the League is already established, and I've never really talked about these three members before, but I think it's a fair statement to say that the Civil War was financed in Philadelphia by three members of the League. The first was Jay Cook, and Jay Cook learned how to sell government bonds better than anybody else. And by the end of the war, his firm alone sold $1.4 billion of goods, bonds. And those are, and again, those are 1860s dollars, 1.4 billion, okay? That's just Jay Cook alone. Next slide, please. Then you have A.J. Drexel. Of course, he is now running his father's still alive, but he is the master banker. He's the most respected banker in Philadelphia. Cook couldn't sell his bonds without Drexel's approval because people can, to Drexel, and say, "Hey, Tony, is Jay Cook the real deal?" And Drexel said, "Yes, buy them." And then the third is Clarence Clark, who was also a founding member of the Union League. His family were bankers. They moved to Philadelphia from Providence, Rhode Island in the 1830s, and he became the president So in 1863, in January, there was the Second National Bank Act. There was no national bank at the beginning of the Civil War, but obviously you have to fund the war, so they needed a national currency, because right now you only have state currency. So the Second National Bank Act created a national banking system with a national currency. Clarence Clark was the president of the First National Bank, and the building is still there on Chestnut Street between 3rd and 4th, though the building itself dates from 1866. It was the first bank to issue the ubiquitous greenback. Remember the greenbacks? As they were printed by the government, because they were printed in green ink. And Clarence Clark actually signed the very first national dollar bill in the country at that point in time. So 3 incredibly important Philadelphians helped finance the Civil War. So between the 3 efforts, we're talking over $2 billion worth of money in the 1860s, all right? And why did the government need that money? Because they had to pay the soldiers. You need soldiers to fight a war. And so one of the very first committees the League established was a military committee, and they did that in June of 1863. And so here we have a recruitment poster, or broadside as it's called, Union League Regiment, 3 months. The first 3 regiments were basically militia units, and they were 3-month units. But it said recruits wanted, Company D, recruiting station at 2nd and Walnut, okay? So the League is actively involved in raising regiments, and eventually there would be 9 white regiments, so that's 9,000 soldiers, okay? And actually the building, the Broad Street Clubhouse, was built on the site of one of a Union League regiment recruitment building itself. So next slide, please, John. And here, this is the only photograph I've ever been able to find of a Union League regiment or its company. This is Company H, the 213th. So that was the 7th Union League Regiment. They were mustered in the beginning of 1865, so really didn't see any combat. But there is, on the next slide, a League member named Charles Izard McEwen. Can anybody tell me where his portrait is in the house? Just want to see how observant. No docents. Docents not included in that. You can't do that. All right. Shame on all of you. All right. So if you go out, when you leave the building, you leave the room tonight, hallway, up the steps, left-hand side. He was the only League member who died in uniform during the Civil War. The Izards and McEwens were plantation owners in South Carolina who migrated to Philadelphia in the early 19th century. Charles Izard, though, as a young man, he was maybe 24, 25, joined the Union League in early 1863. He became the secretary of the publication committee, about which we'll talk shortly. And he wasn't happy just sitting at home or filling out ledgers about where he's sending pamphlets. So he joined the 6th Union League Regiment, the 198th Pennsylvania, in August of 1864 on his own. He would rise to the rank of major. You can see the epaulets on his sleeve, on his shoulders rather, and he would be shot through the heart on March the 30th of 1865, just 9 days before the war would end. Wow. 9 days. What's also ironic, now he is buried at Christ Church Graveyard, which is at the corner of 5th and Vine. So he's not that far away from the Butler family. So it's interesting how you have these two, how it's ironic that you have the Butlers who owned slaves and sold slaves, and then McEwen, who fought to end slavery. So, and then at the same time, the War Department of Washington created the Bureau of Colored Troops, because it was, Lincoln and Frederick Douglass specifically were promoting the fact that let black men fight for their own freedom and citizenship. And so the League created this supervisory committee for the enlistment of colored troops. It was at 1210 Chestnut Street, just a block away from the clubhouse, and you can see it there on the left, and you can see armed black soldiers standing, what did I do with my, here we are. And here we have armed black soldiers, which was a pretty risky thing to do in Philadelphia, because not everybody thought a black man should be allowed to carry a rifle, let alone any kind of loaded arm. And the building was also the home for the free military school for applicants for the command of colored troops. That's fine, John. And so this is Camp William Penn. It is in Elkins Park, but in a neighborhood called Lamont. If you go up Broad Street to Cheltenham Avenue, make a left, go 2 blocks down and make a right, and that's where Camp William Penn was located. It was built to be temporary, but it was built by the Union League. So the Union League actually then was responsible for recruiting the first official federal black troops in American military history. And the League was responsible for creating the first and largest training camp for black soldiers in American military history. So that was Camp William Penn, and you can see them beautifully lined up there. There were 11,000 soldiers, 11 regiments, or 11,000 soldiers at Camp William Penn. Anybody recognize this painting? Docents not permitted. Okay, where is it? Okay, where is the painting? No, it's. All right, Mrs. Brand, thank you. Main hallway opposite Old Cafe, Cafe Meredith. That's where it is, okay? 3 medals of honor. So these 3 soldiers, that is Thomas Hawkins, Master Sergeant, Nathan Edgerton, Adjutant, Lieutenant, and Alexander Kelly, who was a Staff Sergeant. These 3 soldiers picked up the regimental colors, as flags were called, from being captured by the Confederates, because the greatest amount of dishonor a regiment could befall was if they lost their flags to the enemy. And because these soldiers, these officers, retrieved the colors, they each received the Medal of Honor. The battle itself, the Battle of Newmarket Heights, September 29 of 1864, just south of Richmond, produced 18 Medals of Honor in just one day of fighting, and 14 of them went to black soldiers for the first time in American military history, including Hawkins and Kelly themselves. Great painting. And then besides just banking and raising money through the sale of bonds, the United States Sanitary Commission, which was the first civilian volunteer organization founded at the beginning of the Civil War in April of 1861, their goal was to raise money to buy medical supplies for the Army and the Navy, because of course the government wasn't prepared for the war, so they needed all the money they could to buy these medical supplies, and they discovered that people gave money when they were having fun. So they created these series of what became known as Sanitary Commission fairs. The Philadelphia Fair took place on between June 7 and 21 of 1864 on Logan Square. You all recognize that building in the background? That's the Cathedral St. Peter and Paul. It had just opened at the same time as the fair. The fair covered 200,000 square feet, Union Avenue, and over those 3 weeks, they sold everything under the sun, including what famous document that the League has in its archives was sold at the fair, docents not permitted again. But does anybody know? The Emancipation Proclamation, thank you, yes. So the Union League, besides basically all the members of the Philadelphia Sanitary Commission were members of the Union League. So the League suggested the fair in February of 1864, and basically League members managed the fair. And so the League had this idea that, actually George Boker and his best boyhood friend Charles Gottfried Leland had the idea of selling copies of the Emancipation Proclamation. Boker had a good relationship with Lincoln. Lincoln agreed, and so they printed 48 copies, and most of them, not all of them, were sold at the fair, and they were sold for $10 a piece. And for that, now $10 in 1864 was a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But for that $10, you have Abraham Lincoln's signature, you have William Seward, his Secretary of State, and John Nicolay, one of his 2 personal secretaries. All right, so another very functional committee, an important committee, was the Committee on Publications, the Board of Publications, because you can't fight a war without propaganda. You've got to get your point across. And in the 19th century, everything was done on paper. And so in basically 2 years, the League published over 2 million pamphlets, completely paid for by League members, $50,000. And these pamphlets went north, south, east, and even a little west. So because there were Union Leagues in the South, surprisingly enough, because just because you're in the South doesn't mean that you're pro-Confederate and pro-slavery. There were a great number of Unionists in the South. Think of West Virginia seceding from Virginia in 1863 to become a pro-Union and abolitionist state, anti-slavery state, and things like that. So these are some examples of the League pamphlets that were printed. The League members were pretty sharp guys. This is made to look like a Planter's Almanac, which of course everybody still reads to this day. And you've got all the basic information that a farmer would need. And if you turn to page, let's just say 4, there is a speech from Alexander Stephens, who was the Vice President of the Confederacy, of course, telling everybody that he's on the right side of this issue. But if you turn to page 6, it's actually a tear-out coupon. And if you happen to be a Confederate soldier and you're bearing that coupon, it guarantees you safe crossing across a Union picket line and amnesty in the Union Army itself. So this is one way that the League was encouraging Confederate soldiers to basically jump ship. Okay? So these guys are thinking. I mean, they're really thinking about what we can do to upset the Confederate war machine. And the other thing the League did is that it built a clubhouse. I mean, the League knew as soon as they moved into 1118 Chestnut Street that they needed something bigger, and sure enough, they did. And so 2 members purchased the ground at Broad and Sansom, shall we say, in January of 1863. They broke ground in March of 1864, and this is the John Fraser building that we occupied to this very, very day. And it was such an event in Philadelphia. Actually, it was the only major building built in Philadelphia during the Civil War that is still standing. Most buildings are meant to be temporary. And you can see the Daily Evening Bulletin, and it is dated Friday, May the 5th of 1865. So the League had become the most important institution of its kind, not just in the city, but in the country itself. Because by this time, at the end of the Civil War, there were over 700 Union Leagues from east to west and north to south. They were in the south. They were as far west as San Francisco, as far north as Portland, Maine. And George Boker himself said that if the League did nothing else but reproduce itself, then it did as much as it should ever do. So George Boker, again, was the heart and soul of the League. He was the patron saint of the League in many ways. And this is, now, if you ever want to read something, you would never think that reading an annual report could be a fun thing or a very literate thing to do, or a really entertaining thing in some ways, but Boker's annual reports are extraordinary. And he wrote them until 1871. This is what he wrote in the 1865 annual report. If you're wondering what he thinks the League should be doing once the war is over, okay? Let us not therefore suppose that our public annals are closed and that the Union League may degenerate into a mere social club with no higher aims in view than the enjoyment of our hard-won ease. It would be a shame to our proud record and a justification of the slanders of our opponents to admit that the patriotic men of the League have, in these latter days, sunk into a congregation of insipid idlers and nerveless pleasure seekers. Okay? Because the big debate that would envelop the League from 1865 until 1875 is, are we a patriotic social society or are we just a patriotic social society? Are we going to be involved in politics or are we going to ignore politics and just be a social club and enjoy ourselves? And what do you think the answer is? Okay. There you go. Tell us. Patriotic. I mean, to this day, what is the League's motto? Come on, love of country leads. We haven't lost it, okay? All right? So, thank you, Mr. Drzansky.
Jim, that's fantastic. Please thank Jim for that. We're going to have questions in a moment, but that was absolutely fantastic.
So how do we get this in 45 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for some questions.
We do. I didn't think we would.
Really wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Does everybody get the gist of what I was trying to say? This was a city that nobody really knew much about in the 19th century. We don't know much of it in the 21st century. So it's not the Philadelphia you thought it was. It's a very different city, and the League was a very different club. And yet I think the League helped save Philadelphia in many, many ways. And the country.
So just to, Jim and I were talking about this quote by Douglas earlier, and you had a great quote by Douglas about how Philadelphia was so wonderful early in the presentation. But here's another one that I think is really interesting because he talks about Philadelphia sometime in probably that same era, in the 1840s. And then in 1866. In 1866, he's here in Philadelphia for a pro-union Loyalist convention, which included Republicans and abolitionists from both the North and South, which converged in Philadelphia for a celebration convention, and anti-Johnson convention.
September of 1866.
And the League was heavily involved in that. And here's what he wrote about when Douglas, who's a delegate to that, comes to Philadelphia. We were marching through a city remarkable for the depth and bitterness of his hatred of the abolition movement. As cities whose population had mobbed anti-slavery meetings, burned temperance halls, and owned by colored people, and burned down Pennsylvania Hall because it had opened its doors to people of different colors upon terms of equality. But now, 1866, the children of those who had committed these outrages and follies were applauding the very principles which their fathers had condemned. That's the difference in 20-some years. And Jim, my question to you as we start the questions is, how important was the League in making that difference in the feelings of Philadelphians about abolition and African Americans?
That's a really good question because anybody hear of the lost cause, the myth of the lost cause? All right. I think the League was incredibly important during the war and immediately after the war, especially during the Johnson administration, which it fought tooth and nail. I mean, when Johnson was first elected, it gave him a gold medal, only the second gold medal. First Abraham Lincoln, second Andrew Johnson. Within 6 months, they regretted ever doing it because everything the League stood for, Johnson didn't stand for, but you couldn't tell at that time. And I think at that point, so Philadelphia had obviously become a more open and better city than it had been before the war. The country certainly was. But I think over time, though, to George Boker's point, what are we going to do? Who are we going to be? And eventually, at some point, though, I think they lost track of Boker's vision, and instead they became a little bit too much social, perhaps, because the myth of the lost cause was, basically, it's almost as if, you think about the black laws that were created almost immediately after the southern states never admitted defeat. They did not give up the idea that they would become plantation owners again. That was their way of life. That's where they made the money, and they were going to do it again. So I think it was a two-edged sword at that point. So I think in the short term, the League had an awful lot to do with changing the face of the city and the country. But as the 19th century progressed, even the League couldn't put enough fingers in that dam to stop the country from reverting to what it had been before the Civil War itself. And that was our legacy up until the 1960s. It took 100 years to get the Civil Rights Act passed when it should have been passed in the 1860s.
So we do have time for questions. Just raise your hand and staff will get to you as soon as we can. Peter?
Where were all the munitions and munition factories in Philadelphia located? And did that have a large part in accumulating the growth of the League?
Sure. There were two national arsenals in Philadelphia. Frankfurt, which still exists physically, and then there was the Schuylkill Arsenal. So where the big AT&T building is on the Schuylkill on the east side? All right. Actually, there's actually a Pico power station there as well. There's a big old brick wall, stone wall around it. That was the Schuylkill Arsenal. Frankfurt made munitions. Schuylkill made textiles, blankets, uniforms, and things like that. But there were also independent, smaller manufacturers in the city. So, for instance, there was a factory in Bridesburg, go Bridesburg, great little part of the city, and they made muskets as well. So there were independent contractors scattered throughout the entire city that also contributed to making munitions at the same time. And there was a big arsenal now, and the Allegheny Arsenal in Pittsburgh, for instance, was also in Pennsylvania. So Philadelphia was the arsenal of the country in many, many ways in that respect. So.
Questions?
God, was I that bad? Did I not pique your interest enough to add? I failed.
I've always been curious. I think the argument for the lost cause was in some respects dependent upon the idea that the Constitution does not explicitly prohibit secession. And so we had this division and this idea that maybe the southern states were somehow right, and yet the people who incorporated the Union League were convinced of the morality of another course of action. Was that an idea that was prevalent at the time, if you know?
I think that, I don't think people thought about what the Constitution allowed them to do or not allowed them to do. The Southerners didn't give a hoot about the Constitution, obviously. The Northerners, to me, it was more of the issue. To the Southerners, it was an economic issue. To the Northerners, it was a political and moral issue in many, many ways, I think. So to me, the League, actually, if you look at the League's publications, its pamphlets, the League established constitutionality for maintaining the Union and disavowing secession. It was not. It also used the Constitution and morality to disavow slavery at the same time. So, I think we tend to use political instruments the way we want to use them and interpret them in many, many ways. So, but I think the lost cause itself is because the South just didn't want to give up its way of life, plain and simple.
They tried. They tried to make a constitutional argument, the compact versus contract theory, and it had been made before, right, Jim? It wasn't a new idea that you could secede, the idea that you could. I don't know that anyone after the Civil War has seriously, although you'll hear it occasionally, I thought about that. But that theory of compact theory, which Stevens writes in his
All right.
letter that you.
But, all right. So South Carolina threatened to secede in 1832.
Right.
And what was the
Jackson says
response?
no
Jackson
way.
said, not no, but hell no.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Johnson's response was the Union must and shall be preserved.
Right.
So,
Yeah. That was the idea. It didn't hold water.
no.
More questions.
I have a question here.
What were the reasons why Philadelphia would have been a southern-leaning city prior to the Civil War?
All right, so Philadelphia evolved as the largest city in the country. It was halfway between north and south. It was the first major industrial city in the country. And this is an oversimplification, but the South needed a place to sell its cotton. And Philadelphia, by the 1840s, is the world's largest textile manufacturing city. So very early in the 19th century, Philadelphia established an economic relationship with the South. So, and at the same time, think of Philadelphia before the Revolution and after the Revolution as the London of the colonies or the London of the United States. It was a cosmopolitan city. It was a city that had the newest and best fashion from Europe. It was a center of publishing, art, music. I mean, it was architecture. I mean, if you wanted to be somebody, it was the place to be somebody in. And that includes Southerners, because they're living in an agrarian based economy without the same social benefits that Philadelphia offered it. So beginning in the 1790s, when the government was based here, Southerners are moving to Philadelphia as government officials, as senators and congressmen, but many of them never left the city. And actually, Southern families moved to Philadelphia to the point where the 900 block of Spruce Street by 1800 was known as Carolina Row. You saw the quote from the Sunday Dispatch about that block on Walnut Street, 22 houses, palatial houses filled with Southern families. So Philadelphia offered a way to make a living, it offered a way to be somebody, and offered a way to be somebody special at the same time.
Jim, I remember you showing me or explaining to me that silversmiths in Philadelphia would put the palmetto on. That was the symbol of silver made in Philadelphia, was the palmetto tray. And that was a specific reference to the South, and it was made in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So it was deep. It was deep. Questions? More questions? We have one.
Tell us a little about President Lincoln and the Union League.
Oh. Thank you, David. So the League was organized for three reasons: uphold the Constitution, suppress the rebellion, and support Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln was vital to the League, and the League was vital to Abraham Lincoln. Cannot underestimate that and overestimate it either, overstate it either. The League has probably the greatest Lincoln portrait in the country, in Lincoln Hall. And it was, and to show you how seriously the League took that relationship, the League is only 3 days old on December 30th when it sends Edward Dalton Marchant to Washington, D.C. with a letter of introduction to Abraham Lincoln, stating that your supporters in Philadelphia think that there should be a portrait of you because there is none. And furthermore, it should hang in the Hall of Independence. That's where your portrait deserves to hang. Would you please allow this esteemed artist the pleasure and the honor and the privilege of painting your portrait? And Lincoln agreed. That's the first official act made by the Union League of Philadelphia, is to commission a portrait of Abraham Lincoln. So I think that alone tells us how important Abraham Lincoln was to this institution itself. And then the fact that Lincoln came to Philadelphia only once during his administration, and that was to visit the Sanitary Fair on June 16th of 1864. He actually came to the League House that night for dinner at 1118 Chestnut Street, and he was invited to come back, and for the grand opening of the Broad Street building, as we know it, and which was expected to be March of 1864, and Lincoln agreed that he would be here. So, and then the fact that Boker and Leyland sell copies of the Emancipation Proclamation with Lincoln's signature on it, and they had to get his approval. I mean, so it's like the League, everything the League did evolved around supporting Abraham Lincoln, if not overtly, but certainly in ways that were recognizable to the people, because when they brought that portrait back to Philadelphia, by the way, it did hang in the Hall of Independence, not in the League House. It didn't come to League House until December of 1864. So I think that act alone should tell all of us how important the relationship was between Lincoln and the League.
Kira, we have a question right down the front row. Oh, Gary, yes.
If Boker and the leaders were here today, what do you think they would tell Founding Forward about civics education and any other missions that they should accomplish as part of our legacy?
Well,
Write a check.
I was.
So by the way, I have to say, first of all, thank you, Dr. Dorsheimer, for that brilliant question. Dr. Dorsheimer is the chair of our development committee, so let's hear it for Dr. Dorsheimer. Yeah, thank you, Gary.
I think if you look at the League's history, and again, we barely scratched the surface tonight, but all through the League's history, there's always been a focus on good government and good civics. I mean, it's not a new concept here at the League. I mean, as you heard me say earlier, the 3 reasons why the League was founded: to support the Constitution. So obviously the League is involved with civics education, even in its very, very beginning. So I think that the Founding Fathers would applaud what is going on today. If I were them, I'm sure that that's what they would do. So
We have one final question, and it's appropriately going to be asked by the chair of the board of Founding Forward, Mr. Jim Dunnigan. Jim, please.
Thanks, John. First, Jim, thank you for this evening. It's a pleasure to be reminded what a treasure you are to us at the Union League, so thank you.
Jim, thank you, Jim.
My question is, are there other periods in the League's history of turmoil and contention that...
That'll be the next program. No, I mean, no, seriously, I was telling the docents today, between 1866 and 1875, the League was torn between city politics, state politics, and national politics. It was torn between, are we going to follow George Boker's edict, or are we going to become this congregation of insipid idlers and nerveless pleasure seekers? And I am not kidding. I mean, there were 2 factions. James Claghorn, a founding father of the Union League, first treasurer of the League, thought the League should be at this point a social institution, and many members supported him. But other members disagreed, starting with George Boker himself. And it was the Bokerites, if you will, that basically won the day. Now, they made some compromises, which was that I think they understood that getting involved in city politics was going to be a really tough thing to do, even in the 1870s. And so the League decided it would focus on national politics, because at this point, they thought it was more important to support the National Republican Party at that point in time than worry about it here in the city itself. So, yeah. And then if you look at, go to 1893, when there was a special meeting of the membership over the issue of adding the words Republican Party to the bylaws. I mean, here we are 30 years after the Civil War ends, and they're still debating, are we a Republican club or not, type of thing. So, and then when you get in the 20th century, maybe a little less so, until you really, no. I think the 19th century was the more contentious century in terms of the League itself, but still in the 20th century, there were still many issues to be involved. And of course, during World War II and FDR's presidency, it wasn't an easy road for the League, to be honest.
So I think I'm going to ask Jim, we're going to put him on the spot, because he got right up to the point where there was another contentious moment. And it's early 1980s, women members of the Union League of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Would you agree that was contentious? Okay. Then my second question is, will you come back to this group and speak about that at our next library hour here at the Union League?
So
he didn't say yes.
I wasn't thinking from the members. Nope, that's, all right. Anyway, I was thinking more political turmoil or philosophical turmoil, although certainly membership became a big thing in the 1970s and 80s. I mean, it wasn't until 1974 that Democrats were actually openly readmitted to membership for the first time in the 20th century. That was contentious. You talk about admitting the first black member, William Thaddeus Coleman. That was a little contentious. And of course, it took 2 votes to admit women to membership, 1983 and then 1986, because it was so contentious that it didn't pass the first time. So I think there are many levels of turmoil, if you will, but the League has really survived them all and actually thrived after them all, to be honest.
So stay tuned. We will have more on that the next time we see
Can I say one more
Mr.
thing?
Jim. Of course you can.
All right, so I would just encourage all of you, given what you've heard tonight, this is your patrimony. You know, this is a member equity club. You own the building, you own its history, and you own its artifacts. Embrace it. I mean, this is your club, and no other club in the country has what this place has. So so get to know it better if you think you don't know what it is well you do. But seriously, embrace your history, because it's better than any other club in the country.
And no other club in the history, no other league has Jim Mundy. So please thank Jim Mundy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much again, Jim. Thank you for being here. We will see you next week at our program at Liberty Hill on Wednesday on the First Amendment. And please take a moment and get the QR code, and it's not working, and let us know what you think about this program and others. Thank you.